My name is Gary Kenton. I am the chair of the Immigration Policy Reform Roundtable of the League of Women Voters of the Piedmont Triad. And this is the first of what we hope will be a series of programs about the immigration and refugee issue as it relates to our political situation, but also as it relates to life here in Greensboro and in the Triad. So the only way we'd like to frame our show is for people to, when we're thinking about the U.S. border, what we think is a misconception is to think of it, we certainly shouldn't think of it as any kind of invasion, but think about who is coming to our border. Just for one example, roughly 7 million people have left the nation of Venezuela in the last several years. Many of those 7 million people have tried to enter the United States. And that is just a fraction of the families, and mostly these are families coming to the southern border. So we hope that people would look upon the border situation as a problem, even a crisis, but let's frame it properly. It's not a crisis because of those people coming. There are other crises that have led to this situation. Anyway, thank you for joining us. And luckily for you, we have some people with some real expertise on the matter here. Dara Arroyo is here to my right. She is an attorney with McKinney Law, and she works especially on asylum cases. And she is a graduate of Elon Law, so there's your local connection. Anne Marie Dooley on my left has been with McKinney Law for 8 years, 9 years?
Oh, 15 years.
15. I see, I was reading an old bio. Okay, so I was halfway to being right. Anyway, 15 years, a seasoned immigration attorney. She's been a long time a member of our roundtable and helped us to understand the immigration problems from a legal perspective. Anne Marie spoke, we did an event in May and sort of did what we called Immigration 101, that Anne Marie provided the basic information that people need to know about the immigration system. Anyway, with that, I will hand it over to Dara.
Absolutely. Well, Anne Marie, I just wanted to start by talking about how immigration has become such, like you mentioned, such a big topic in this election year, and there seems to be this conversation about immigration rates and crime rates and how those may or may not potentially correlate. Could you please speak to us a little bit more about what are the truths behind that and what are the not so accuracies?
Right. Well, we're hearing a lot from former President Trump about these countries to the south of us emptying their jails and their mental institutions and it being a crisis of all these criminals coming over to the United States. And as Gary mentioned, many of the people that are coming are actually families coming, fleeing violence or extreme poverty or unstable governments. When we're looking at crime rates, right now in the United States, we have the lowest violent crime rate that we've had in 4 decades since the inauguration of Joe Biden. And studies have been done over the last half century, and every single one of these studies shows a correlation between if areas that have high immigration populations tend to have lower criminal crime rates. And so there definitely is a correlation between immigration and crime rates, but it's not what's being presented in the media. It is where you have high immigrant populations. If you look at crime rates and incarcerated populations, it's like a 60% higher rate for native-born U.S. citizens to be incarcerated versus immigrants. And so there just is no truth at all to these statements that immigrants cause crime or that criminals are raiding the border. There's just absolutely no truth to that.
What about jobs? I mean, the other thing we keep on hearing is that these people are coming to take away your jobs. And my understanding is that, well, one of two things. First, it's not there's no data to support that jobs that would be done by Native Americans are now being taken by immigrants and refugees, but that immigrants and refugees do a lot of work that Native Americans don't want, that wouldn't get done, like picking our food.
Right, and we can get to some of the solutions to migration. You know, we do have labor shortages, and there is a demand, and as Gary said, that there are people who are coming here because we need that employment. We have very low unemployment rates right now in the United States, but for immigrants to come and be sponsored, they're not replacing U.S. workers. You have to show that there's not a minimally qualified U.S. worker to fill the position, and then an employer, a U.S. employer, can hire a foreign national and sponsor them for residency. And so that you're exactly right. These are not people coming and taking our jobs. They are not qualified. Many of these people, until they go through the system and apply for asylum, they're not eligible for work authorization.
Right. So, all right, I guess from our previous discussions, I know, so, I mean, paint a picture for us. If we're in the middle of an election year and either Donald Trump will be returned to the White House or Kamala Harris will be president of the United States, paint a picture for us of how it would be different in terms of immigration and for immigrants and refugees.
Well, we can look at what happened during President Trump's first term. You know, I always say that future behavior, past behavior is a great indicator of future behavior. And we don't have to guess. We know what President Trump did the last time. And I would argue that he came in not really knowing what he was doing, and then COVID slowed him down. But during the 2 years that he was really at it, we saw drastic changes in our immigration policies. We saw, you know, we talk about this, there's the talk about the border wall. He didn't have a lot of success building an actual wall, but there was this invisible wall that advocates talked about. There were all of these barriers even to legal immigration. We talked about employment. We saw cases where people who had applied for H-1Bs and they were just renewing those. In the past, the agency gave deference to a prior determination. Under the Trump administration, they took away that deference policy. And so what we saw was the system became really bogged down and slowed down. We had huge backlogs. Cases that were taking months started taking years. There were applications that they just did not adjudicate at all. You had hiring freezes at USCIS. So when people left the agency, they were not replaced. So even when President Biden came into office, we had cases that under the Obama administration were taking 6 to 8 months. We're taking 4.5, 5 years. And we're still trying to recover from these long processing times. So it wasn't just harsh policies at the border, which we also had very harsh policies at the border. We had families that were coming in, being separated, children in cages. It was a very, very difficult time for an immigration attorney. We had before, we've always had presidents prioritize who they were going to remove. We saw that was a complete dismantling under the Trump administration. We saw everybody became, if you were undocumented, you automatically became a priority. And we saw local impact on that. We had Nestor Marchi, his son is a firefighter here in Greensboro, and his father was removed, someone who had been in the United States for decades and was able to stay, was removed. We saw several people go into sanctuary in Greensboro and throughout North Carolina. We had Juana and Minerva locally, and then we had Rosa that was taking sanctuary in Chapel Hill. Those were very serious cases. Rosa in particular, our office represented her, and we ended up winning her case at the Fourth Circuit. That was an asylum case, and had she been returned, had she not taken asylum, she would likely be dead today. And so there was a very big difference in enforcement priorities during that time. Dara in our office actually does the removal under Biden. She is fortunate enough not to have been doing removal during the prior administration. But Dar, how is removal these days?
Absolutely, and it's a complete change from what you just described, because what we've been saying a lot is that when everybody is a priority, nobody is. And so that has been the biggest change, is that we're seeing actual structured priorities where the Department of Homeland Security has decided who are they most concerned about and who would they prefer to spend their resources on when it comes to removal proceedings or deportation proceedings. So what we're seeing is that people with serious criminal history, or people who are recent arrivals who have maybe recently entered the United States, people who are a threat to the national security, so if there's concerns about terrorism or anything along those lines, those are the people that the department is focusing their resources on when it comes to removal proceedings. So who they're not focused on is, maybe 80-year-old grandma who has been in the country for like 40, 50 years and has never had a criminal charge. Well, maybe let's not spend our resources deporting her when we only have limited resources in this country, and the U.S. government does have limited resources. So they're really being more careful as to who they're deciding and what cases they're fully deciding to prosecute and move forward with, so that they can focus on their security and safety concerns. We're seeing a massive difference in that area.
What is the backlog at the immigration court right now? Because that's another, I know that's a priority under the prior administration, is to deport anybody who's undocumented. What's the reality there?
I mean, we are still seeing a significant backlog. I already have hearings scheduled for 2027, and so these are cases that people that are seeking asylum that will have to wait that long just to have their first hearing. That's not even the hearing where the judge will determine if they will be granted asylum or not, for example. That is just the preliminary hearing. We are seeing those years in advance. I am handling cases from years ago, 5, 6 years ago, that are still in proceedings, that are still taking a while to get through our local Charlotte court. And so yes, there's still a significant backlog in our local court.
And those people that you're representing, they are here.
They are here.
Okay, so we're not even talking about the thousands, tens of thousands of people who are trying to enter, and then they would get on that line
Right.
once they're here. So it's a daunting picture, and I guess it's practical to focus on the potential wrongdoers rather than grandma, but it also seems compassionate to me. Why? I guess this week they just came out with a thing showing how, what was it, $100 billion a year of taxes that immigrants and refugees pay, and they get, in most cases, nothing back. Another myth is that immigrants and refugees come in and they are a weight on our welfare system, that they're getting all these services. Well, no, they're not, even though they get jobs and pay taxes. So in a just system, they would be able to avail themselves of some of those services. Anyway, I'm sorry, you guys, they've worked hard to prepare. They know what they're talking, I'll just go on. So let's talk more, projecting towards the next administration. My impression is that it's a little easier to talk about what a second Trump administration would be like, because there was an immigration bill that passed or came close to passing the Congress, but Trump put an end to it. He told the Republicans to vote against it. It was a hard-fought compromise. The Democrats were agreeing to many of the things that Republicans have lobbied for years, but they stopped it. Why? Because Trump wanted this hammer, this issue as a hammer to hit the Democrats with, which has made it a much more difficult issue, I think, for Democrats to articulate, because it gets complicated. Much more simple is the picture that's being, you turn on the TV and you see a Trump rally and people are holding up these pre-made mass deportation signs. what are we talking about?
Well, we have seen, I know that President Trump is trying to step back from Project 2025, and he can. Stephen Miller recently did an interview and laid out what the next Trump administration would look like on immigration. He's talking about using Department of Defense funds and creating deportation like camps for people until they can get through the system, and diverting funds for that. And so, his plan is mass deportations. The problem with that is the system really can't handle it. It couldn't handle it when he was in office the first time, and we just can't deport ourselves out of this problem. We've got 12 million, roughly, people who are undocumented in this country. We're trying to handle, to put it in context, when President Obama was in office during his first term, he went really hard on enforcement. The immigration court, they had over 500,000 cases, and we thought that was a crisis. And it was a crisis. We've got over 2.5 million cases in immigration court right now. We just cannot process that many cases. That's just not practical. And so what we really need, instead of making this a political issue, we need to have our members of Congress and the administration come together and look at solutions. We talked about what President Trump would like to do, and I think that most of it is deporting everybody. I know that there have been talk about eliminating some of these humanitarian programs, eliminating parole programs, eliminating deferred action for childhood arrivals or dreamers, also eliminating, I'm guessing that would include the military parole in place and deferred action for parents of our service members. That's something we haven't talked about, but that President Biden has done other things. The border, there's only so much he can do, right? Without Congress helping and passing and allotting more resources. But there are other things that the administration has done that's not getting attention. They have looked at these crises in Haiti and Venezuela and some of these countries where the governments are collapsing, and trying to set up places where people can be screened before they enter the United States to see if they qualify as refugees. We don't have the infrastructure in our hemisphere like you have in Europe and the Middle East and in Africa for refugee screenings. But they started setting that up. But that's going to take cooperation with other governments. In addition to that, they've done a family reunification parole program for family members from certain countries like Colombia, Venezuela. If they've got family members that have filed petitions for them and they're just waiting because the lines are so long, there's a family reunification parole program that we don't hear about. So President Biden has expanded parole in that way to bring people to the United States in an orderly way, because it's also very dangerous for these vulnerable people to cross countries to come to the United States. And so those are things, but all of those programs are going to go away, which I think is only going to make the crisis at the border even worse. And so we haven't even looked at those things, but there are things that the administration has done to try to address the crisis, things that are within its power without Congress acting.
Right. Yeah.
And just to expand a little bit more on that, this administration has also created a different system for our southern border. And that's called the CBP-1 parole version, where people who are interested in coming to seek asylum, instead of putting themselves in a dangerous position and presenting themselves at the border and asking for asylum, they're able to schedule an appointment and be pre-vetted in some ways, so that then they can show up at a scheduled time and then be paroled into the country precisely to seek asylum and seek that protection.
Well, my understanding is that that's a really good idea. Sounds practical again, but that there have been glitches with the system. But is your impression that, however, it could be better, that is working? Is that?
I think yes, there have been
Right.
glitches with the system, but yes, it's working in the sense of I'm seeing clients who went through much less dangerous paths to be able to come in and seek asylum. I'm
Right.
seeing clients that have just safety-wise. I have spoken with Venezuelan families that were seeking safety, but that a program like that was not available for them, so they had to put their children in more dangerous situations just to be able to enter and just to be able to seek asylum in this country. And now it has allowed families to be together to present themselves as a family and to seek that protection.
Well, you two tell me, to me, a big picture here is whether you have one political party, at least at the leadership, that really doesn't want to solve these problems, prefers to have this as an issue to heighten people's fears of things that they don't know about. I will say, just to prove the League is nonpartisan, that the Democratic President Obama was, one of his nicknames was the deportation chief, that he really increased the number of deportations. And I'll say the last American president that made an effort at some kind of comprehensive reform was George W. Bush. That I think, being from Texas, he saw, even those many years ago, that this was a crisis that was going to be building, and it was nowhere near what it is today, and came very close to passing something, and it was only his right flank in the Republican Party that prevented that. So I think, as with many other issues in this country, it's a matter of, do we want to solve it? Because I think if we had a Congress that really wanted to solve this, we could make dramatic progress in, it's going to take a while because we've dug ourselves a big hole, but we could make progress on this issue. But it's up to us to paint this picture for our elected officials so that they represent us doing their best to find solutions rather than have it just be another thing to fight over on social media. Anyway, I'm sorry. So I guess we were painting this picture. I guess Kamala Harris, we can't really refer to what would happen under a Harris administration, but if there's a Biden-Harris administration, or Harris whatever administration, do we have any indication of what kind of policies we might see?
Well, I would expect that we would see many of the same programs that we have seen under the Biden administration. She does, she traveled to Central America and to look at some of the root causes of the migration. And I know that she has worked on getting companies to invest in Central America. So I think that we can look at some of those things that she's done in the past. And I don't think that she's calling immigrants criminals, and I think that she understands that this is a complex issue and that it's going to take bipartisan support. I'm hoping that if we can get through this election, that we can sit down and have a serious conversation about immigration, because we've been going back and forth. I mean, we've been having these conversations for a decade, just with the League, and so. But there are a lot of forces at play. There's a lot of money being made on detaining immigrants. There's, and so it's a complex issue.
Yeah. Well, tell me if I'm wrong, but Kamala Harris, you may know the country. I'm not able to remember exactly which country it was, but she did get some investment.
She did.
Outside, and it cut.
In Guatemala, right.
In Guatemala.
Yeah, I think it was 30,000 jobs and another 60,000 is this, I can't remember which company it is, but right, she's getting foreign investment in these Latin American countries. And I think we can expect to see more of that. She is she's not the border czar. I know that that Trump is trying to paint her as the border czar, but her job was more to look at some of the root causes and what can we do to solve them. So I do think that puts her in a unique position because she's been studying this issue. And so she has an understanding of why people are coming. And I think that we can expect her to continue to work on
I mean, to
on
me,
those issues.
that's the solution everybody would get behind. Go to these other countries, invest, and stop the outward migration from those countries. They're not going to come to the border if they've got jobs where they want it. They all want to stay home. The people coming to our border, America is the land of opportunity, always has been and continues to be. But they're only coming to this very difficult situation on the border because it's better than what they're leaving.
That's absolutely right.
The picture, we had a woman come to our program in May, and I'm sure we only heard the tip of the iceberg, but she had to walk across countries with her daughter. And she didn't go into detail about some of what she was subjected to along the way. And from what we read, your imagination runs away with you. But it took her, months and months of trial and tribulation and determination, and she got here. She joined us here in Greensboro to tell us her story, and it just, it's inspiring, but why it should be so difficult for a young woman like that, actually still a young woman, and her daughter is unthinkable. Anyway, I know go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, and that's where some of these screening outposts that we talked about hopefully will help solve that problem, where so that people like the young woman, I was at that program, they don't have to make that dangerous journey, because so many people, she was a lucky one, but there are a lot of people who don't make it. And so, I think that if we were able to put together more programs and places where people could be screened outside the country before they make the dangerous journey to see if they qualify as refugees. You don't hear about, Jeremy made this point at that program, we don't hear about refugees from El Salvador or refugees from Honduras because we don't have the infrastructure in place for that. The only way for these people to get protection in the United States is to actually come and step on U.S. soil and seek asylum, because there's just not a way for them to apply to be refugees outside the United States. So I think it's very, very important.
Well, thank you, Anne Marie. Thank you, Dora. And thank you for tuning in. And I hope, again, this is going to be the first in a series of these half-hour programs we're going to do to try to separate some of the myths from the realities, to try to share some information with folks. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.
And you're supposed to talk about registering to vote. There's not a, wherever you fall on this, if you believe in restrictive immigration policy, or you believe in America, as a welcoming immigrants, wherever you fall on that issue, you've got a clear choice in this election. And so we would encourage everybody to register, and I think that the League has some resources to learn about issues and
Thank you, Anne Marie. Now I will survive the next League meeting. Vote411.org it's a nonpartisan site for all the information that you would want about the candidates. But go to lwv.org or LWVPT is your local League of Women Voters for more information.